This week's Parsha Balak is quite famous because it includes sort of a fantastical story in it. The background is the name of the Parsha. Balak was a king who was an enemy, or his people were an enemy of the Israelites. Oh, I guess Isabel's not reading because she just left the class. So Balak was a king, an enemy of the Israelites, and he realized that in a traditional battle, he would not be able to defeat them. So what he decided to do instead is he found a man of God, or gods as it were, Bilam, who was a prophet who could speak to God and miracles, etc., like that, and said, I want you to use your powers to curse the Israelites. But Balak knew of the true God of the Israelites and knew that without permission from the Israelite God, the one true God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So it's almost an absurd thing. Why would God ever give Bilam permission to curse his chosen people? Regardless, Bilam goes through all of the proper channels, offering sacrifices and trying to get, God to allow him to curse our people. And he keeps getting stopped along the way. The end of the story, which I'll talk about actually tonight, is he's finally ready to curse them. He tries, he literally opens his mouth against God's will. And instead of saying, cursed are the Israelites, instead he says, Ma tovu ahalecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents. He blesses them. But one of the most famous stories is that while Bilam is along the road with his animals, his donkey blocks his path, and he gets furious and he starts hitting his donkey. He has very bad attributes. He's just not a good person, despite his ability to communicate with God, which is such a peculiar balance there. The rabbis recognize that his prophecy is of the highest level, yet he's a horrible person. But then ultimately, oh, excellent, Isabel is back. But then ultimately, through the power of an angel, the donkey of Bilam starts talking to him and saying, what are you doing here? And they have this whole back and forth and stop doing it. And Bilam ultimately doesn't listen. He's as stubborn as a donkey. You could fill in the blank there. But what I wanted to explore was two questions today. The first one is a bigger, more abstract question. Now, when we read the Torah, there are many miraculous things that happen in there. In some ways, it's the definition, how God involves God's self in our lives of the Israelites with the 10 plagues, the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, the creation of the universe, all miraculous. So why would a talking donkey be so out of the ordinary? And regardless of the fact that it seems to fit in, the rabbis, or many later rabbis, are troubled by this. A talking donkey is peculiar. It doesn't fit in with the natural order of things. And the rabbis are very set on the idea that the universe has an order and it needs to stick to it. All of the miracles are somehow existent within nature. The fact that the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea split, that's something that could potentially happen. In fact, in the Torah itself, it mentions the wind blowing on it. It seems as if it's natural, even though it's clearly a gift from God. There are locusts. So even though there's a plague of locusts, there are times when locusts attack. So every miracle happens through nature. And this is something recognized not only Maimonides much later, but even as early as the rabbis of the Talmud and the Mishnah. So the way that they get around this is they suggest, actually, in this beautiful Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, and Isabel, I'll have you read this, is they look at a bunch of things that just don't fit into nature. They seem to be against nature, and they say, no. Just like when God created the universe, God defined that gravity on Earth should be 9.8 meters per second squared, or that when you mix, H2O, hydrogen, and 2 oxygen, they'll create water, et cetera, like that. God wrote the rules of the universe, and God does not break God's own rules. So what happens when we have talking donkeys? Well, maybe God wrote that into the equations of the universe at the beginning. So Isabel, this Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, please.
10 things were created on the eve of the first Shabbat at twilight. And these are they: the mouth of the earth that swallowed Korach in Numbers, the mouth of the well that accompanied the Israelites in the wilderness in Numbers, the mouth of the donkey that spoke to Balaam in Numbers, the rainbow that served as a covenant after the flood in Genesis, the manna that God provided the Israelites in the wilderness in Exodus, the staff of Moses, the shamir, the wonder worm that helped build the temple without metal tools, the letters, the writing, the tablets, The last three were aspects of the Ten Commandments. And some say also the destructive spirits and the burial places, a place of Moses and the ram of Abraham, our father. And some say also the first set of tongues from which all others were made.
Thank you, Isabel. So working backwards. So when it says these things were created, they almost imagine an actual forge. Sort of like in those other cultures, you have those gods that actually are blacksmiths. So these miraculous cosmic divine tongues that are used to actually form all of these things. And then just explaining some of these items that may not be clear. The ram of Abraham is from the binding of Isaac, Akedat Yitzhak. The letters are, how God miraculously made the 10 commandments. He just formed them. How is that possible? The Shamir wonder worm is that when building the actual Beit HaMikdash, the temple, there was a law that because it was a sacred place, you don't bring metal tools because metal is used to make swords and death. Well, how else are you going to shape stone if you don't have metal tools? So there was a tradition that you had a worm, and there is actually sort of some scientific basis that there are certain microscopic worms, et cetera, like that eat stone over hundreds of years, but they imagine one that you could put on the stone and it would form the stone any way you wanted regardless. All of these things are miraculous. All of these things are they can't, they're more than mere coincidence. But for the rabbis, and this is fascinating, they're not okay with just saying God just came in and just shifted nature. For them, God created the world perfectly. So why would God need to go in and break the world to fix it if it was already made perfectly? So these miracles are not God changing the course of nature. God already predetermined that at the moment the Israelites and Moses stood on the banks of the Yam Suf, of the Sea of Reeds, and Moshe lifted up his staff, and at the right moment in history, the sea would lift. Just as if God set a rule in the universe. Here's a bobby pin I found on the floor. God set the rule that if I decided in my head to lift it up with my hand, it would work. I know that's so inane. That's not a good example, but that's the whole point. These are the rules of the universe. When I lift up a bobby pin in my hand, all the physics, the atoms, everything, that's how it works. When the Israelites come to the Yam Suf, that's the physics of how it works. When Bilam, and that's what it mentions in the middle, when Bilam is walking along the path and his donkey stops him, the donkey will start to speak these predetermined set of words. Again, for the rabbis, all of these things that are miraculous are actually parts of nature. Now, one of the questions is, does that mean God cannot go in and change nature? Could God go in and just decide, I'm going to make all cats be able to talk, even though I didn't decide that at the beginning? Or is the point here that what I mentioned before, it's not that God can't do that. God created the universe. Of course, God could change it, but rather that God created the universe the exact way God wanted it the first time. And to be able to maintain that belief that the universe was created perfectly in the version that we now live in, then all of these examples where it seems like nature is being subverted or broken, no, God planned it from the beginning. That might be more the theology. And the rabbis further continue this in this following midrash. Jane, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. They're just going to unpack it a little bit or add a little bit to it, nuance, please.
The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. The Holy One opened her mouth from the day when she was created, since the power of speech had been given to her mouth from that time. But she did not have permission to speak, for her mouth had been sealed until this moment, since the text does not say the Lord put speech in her mouth. Rather, the Lord opened her mouth. From this, we know that speech had been placed in her mouth from creation, and the only thing lacking was the act of opening.
Thank you. So again, this is the same idea that this donkey, the universe was created so that this donkey would be born, that would have the capacity for speech. And it's not that God created that, gave speech that donkey already had it. And God just, flicked the switch or unlocked the door, whatever the metaphor is. The donkey was ready to speak and God said, go for it. So again, it's a really big statement on miracles in general. So when somebody falls in a 25-foot hole and they survive, do we say that God got involved in the world and saved that person who fell in the hole? Or do we say that that was all preordained? Now, I guess this conversation could go a little bit into what's the point of freedom then? If everything everything, every miracle is totally predetermined. What's our role in it? And one simple way to respond to it is that the well, the be'er, that wherever the Israelites went in the wilderness, they could find water in it. That was created from day one. However, it would not start giving water unless the Israelites went there. So it was the choice of the Israelites to leave Mitzrayim, to leave Egypt, to follow God, to receive the Ten Commandments, etc. So again, just like there's a bobby pin right here, and if I want to pick it up, it's possible for me to do so. That's the laws of the universe, that I can pick up a physical object. But if I don't want to, it'll just sit there. So that might be a way to look at this, is that even though all the laws of the universe, all the things that could possibly happen are set in place, there are no miracles. God does not change nature. God made it perfect the first time. Whether or not these miracles are going to happen depends on our choices. Founding the modern state of Israel, God preordained that in the 48th, the War for Independence, that the Israelites, the Jewish people, would win, but only if they decided to fight the war, to declare independence. So again, miracles don't have any less significance. It's just a matter of how we look at it, and it's a different way of looking at creation and God's role in the world. God is still involved in the world, but God is not constantly going down and changing and fixing things. Rather, God set it up perfectly the first time, and it's on us to discover, God's plan, as it were. So before we go on to the third source, which takes a totally different, completely different direction, any questions up until now? Beautiful. So we've used this next text before, the Guide for the Perplexed, Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim. And he is actually one of the people that really pushes for the idea that all miracles, hello, Leonard, all miracles happen within nature. God functions within the natural world. God does not make magical things happen. Everything happens through the course of nature. But there's another idea suggested in the Moreh Nevuchim. Now, this particular paragraph is not a translation of Rambam's text directly. It's a part of the introduction by the translator, I think, M. Friedlander. And so he's definitely reflecting Rambam's ideas. And this is an idea that's in Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. But you can see here how it's a wildly different and certainly more controversial notion, but it's still one that has been suggested by many rabbis, particularly Rambam, throughout the generations. So Gloria, if you would take again this from the introduction to probably the best complete translation of Rambam's work by Friedlander, please.
The theory that imagination was an essential element in prophecy is supported by the fact that figurative speech predominates in the prophetical writings, which abound in figures, hyperbolical expressions, and allegories. The symbolic acts which are described in connection with the visions of the prophets, such as the translation of Ezekiel from Babylon to Jerusalem, Isaiah's walking about naked and barefoot, Jacob's wrestling with the angel, and the speaking of Bilam's donkey, had no positive reality. The prophets, employing an elliptical style, frequently omitted to state that a certain event related by them was part of a vision or a dream. In consequence of such elliptical speech, events are described in the Bible as coming directly from God, although they simply are the effect of the ordinary laws of nature, and as such depend upon the will of God. Such passages cannot be misunderstood when it is borne in mind that every event and every natural phenomenon can, for its origin, be traced to the primal cause. In this sense, the prophets employ such phrases as the following, quote, "And I will command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it," end quote, or, quote, "I have also called my mighty men."
Excellent, thank you. So there's a number of things to unpack here, but let's go with the facts that Rambam has, at his back, the evidence that he brings. You read through the prophets, and he mentions here Yechezkel. So Ezekiel is the famous vision of the chariot, that's carrying God with his throne, with this being with multiple heads, and all of these creatures that almost look like aliens. But it's very clear from the text of Yechezkel that he's having a dream. It might be a waking dream, but he never claims that he actually saw it. And if you look through the works of the prophets, they're quite clear that everything they're seeing is a vision. Now, they believe it's a vision sent to them by God, but they don't say that these miraculous things actually happen. The dreams of the prophet Daniel, all of these things are just visions they see in their mind's eye. And by the way, in the Torah, Yaakov, after he tricks his father, Yitzchak, into giving him the birthright of his brother Esau, and he's running away, he falls asleep and he has a dream, the dream of the ladder or the ramp ziggurat, the pyramid, but he knows it's a dream. But when he wakes up, he says, I didn't know God was in this place. And that's a very important move that Rambam says here, is that these visions, these things didn't actually happen. However, they were definitely sent by God. And the final thing that he's saying is, even if if I have a dream about these angels that come to Milwaukee and they float around a specific place, and I wake up and say, God is telling me that we should have an event at this place, even though it was clearly a dream, and that didn't really happen per se. If I were to say that God commanded me through angels to, have an event on this specific, or build a synagogue, that's a better example, build a synagogue on this specific place, even though the angels didn't literally appear before me, because I believe that God showed me, I can kind of skip a step and just say, God showed me through angels. Read between the lines. I meant he showed me in a dream, but it really doesn't matter, because God wanted me to get to this result. Whether it was a dream or whether it was real almost doesn't matter, because God still caused it. And I want to repeat that again. That's very key to what Rambam is saying here, because there are times in the Torah where Yaakov is very clear that it's a dream, but there are other times where they don't say it's a dream. They discuss miraculous things as if they really happen. And Rambam is suggesting that no, they really were in a dream state, but they don't say that because it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that God commanded them to do this or sent them this message. Now, obviously you can see, or not obviously, but you can see where this is troubling, because it suggests that certain miraculous things in the Torah just didn't happen. And plenty of people really go to town on Maimonides and really, take him to task. And how dare you suggest that this thing didn't actually happen? However, again, Rambam has a lot of evidence from the Torah itself, and certainly from the prophets, that a lot of things that are written literally may not have been meant to be taken literally. And his point is, it doesn't really matter, because God wanted these prophets to see this vision. So now going back to Bilam, which he mentions here explicitly, was there actually a talking donkey ever in the history of the universe? No. But did God want Bilam to perceive a talking donkey, to have this experience, to wake up from a dream where he had beaten his donkey and his donkey talked back to him? Yes. And that's really key here. Whether or not we're suggesting that these miracles are put in place and they're somehow part of nature, or they're really just a waking dream or a hallucination, at the end of the day, what Rambam says is that's almost not important, as long as we still hold that God wanted these things to happen. Whether God did a miraculous thing or God sent us a vision. And I had a dream many years ago where I woke up and I really felt, I was like, I think God was trying to tell me something. That was a personal moment of faith, and it inspired me for a long time. And I think many people have that. And even though I'm not going out there seeing ghosts and demons and angels, that doesn't mean someone can't feel God, and God is not sending us messages in other ways. So this text, even though it's a summary from the translator, it's very much an idea in the Rambam. I don't think it takes away from the strength of the Torah, even though plenty of rabbis really taken a task. For the simple thing is, fine, Yaakov had a dream, but everything else that happened, like Abraham's ram and everything like that, it never says that was a dream. How dare you suggest otherwise? But regardless, we can see that the rabbis are very troubled by things that are out of nature. What do we do with them? So before we go on to the final section, any questions up until now? Yeah, Gloria, please.
For me, this makes everything more believable. I mean, if you can combine the others with this, or just take this alone, to me, it's a lot more realistic.
Yeah, and I will say that Rambam himself, again, I don't know what's actually in his head, but it's pretty clear that he deeply believed in God and that God created the universe and could certainly do these miraculous things. but that God chose to give us the Torah in a way that would be easier for our brains to process and still be believable today. Now, many people disagree with Rambam and take him to task, but I would say, including myself personally, his philosophy on how we can both believe in God and rationality, he has the leading philosophy, and he's the Rambam. So if you want to hold by him, he's no slouch. And there's multiple books, I think I've mentioned to you and Leonard before, where even the idea of the earth being up to 6,000 years old and evolution and creation, all of that stuff, and whether you take things literally, Rambam can be a path for the scientifically minded to still maintain faith in God and God's Torah, and still maintain, and not even faith, but knowledge in the scientific process. So I think it's very important that he's part of this conversation. But even the rabbis saying there were magical cosmic tongues, they're kind of hinting at, we still believe in a universe that has order and rules. They just believe that those rules were put there, that rules that are more miraculous are put in place, but the universe is not a wonky, wild place. There is a set universe that is predictable. And that's what science says. So even though that Mishnah may not be as loved by someone who's irrationally minded, you can see the rabbis are still trying to create a predictable world that can fit with what we see and what we learn. So this next section here, I think, is oh yeah, Jane, yes. I'm unmuting you. You just got to click on your side.
If you could pull it down again. I was just having trouble with the last
sure.
quotes. I'm trying to figure out how to read these last quotes from Isaiah.
So the truth is, I'd have to, this is out of context. We'd have to go look at them inside, and we can certainly do that after the class. But there are more examples of things that appear to be taken. One would be taken literally, but Rambam, or at least translators' understanding of Rambam, would say no, they meant figuratively, but they left out the language of I'm doing it figuratively because, again, this is what God wanted me to see, what God wanted me to do, etc. But again, just those few words, you'd have to go look at those instances, which he brings in the book of Isaiah. And if you read the stories, it probably, based after reading this, if you go to Isaiah chapter 5, verse 6 and 11:3, you'd probably be like, I see how
what he's talking about. Okay.
Exactly. But I don't recall exactly off the top of my head. So Leonard, this next section, so the big question, or the second big question here is, now we've kind of explored, what do we do with a miraculous talking donkey? All right, so we've seen them different ways. But the other question is, why a donkey? So whether it was a miracle, supernatural event, or a vision in a dream, regardless, God chose a donkey. Why did God choose a donkey to send a message to Bilam about stop trying to curse my people, what you're doing is wrong? So we're going a little bit out of chronological order, but this first source from the 16th century from the Kli Yakar, and he starts with this verse from the Torah where it says the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. And as we saw earlier, the donkey could speak all along, but God said, all right, it's time to play your role. So go ahead, Leonard. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey.
The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. It seems that this too addressed the needs of the moment in order to show him, Bilam, that he was similar to a donkey, which does not have the capacity to speak. But God opened its mouth only for the sake of Israel. So too, the Lord only opened Bilam's mouth in prophecy for the sake of Israel. And also so that the nations would not say, quote, if we too had prophets, we would have done what is right, unquote.
Excellent, thank you. So I think our gut instinct is when it said he was similar to a donkey is because of his stubbornness. We'll come back to that. But what he's actually saying here is a donkey can only do this miraculous, incredible thing when God allows it to. So to Bilam, to be able to curse or bless any nation is only when God allows him to. So God says, I can make donkeys talk. And so too, if I can have the power to make donkeys talk, I have the power to make you shut your mouth or open your mouth to bless the people. If I can put words in the mouth of donkeys, I can certainly put words into your mouth, Bilam. So that's the Kli Yakar's take there on what's the similarity of donkeys. So the truth is, it didn't actually have to be a donkey. He doesn't bring up the idea of stubbornness there. So we're going to come back to that. But so this could have been any animal, but it's an interesting idea. Why a talking animal? Because animals don't. So if it had been a parrot, that wouldn't have been good because parrots do talk. But if you had done a horse or a camel or any of these things, it would have been just as powerful. So this next source here, and Jane, now we will go back to you from an early midrash. Is also kind of more of a, it's not specifically about the donkey. It's more about the general lesson that God was trying to teach to Bilam. So please.
If only I had a sword in my hand, a parable. This is like a doctor who comes to heal by means of his words a patient who was bitten by a snake. Along the road, he sees a lizard and starts to look around for a stick to kill it. They said to him, "You can't get rid of this without a weapon. How are you going to heal by means of your words one who is bitten by a snake?" So too the donkey said to Balaam, "You can't kill me unless you have a sword in your hand. So how do you plan to destroy an entire nation?" Balaam was silent and had no answer.
So this again is a verse, if I only had a sword in my hand. So he's in the, whether it's the vision or whether it's real or not, Bilam is mad at the donkey, wants to get him out of the way. He said, if only I had a sword, then I could take care of this donkey. So they bring in this parable here about a doctor who goes around, and this is also kind of a dig at, these miracle healers who sell snake oil. It's actually a very good example to bring here, but they say, I'll put my hands over you and you'll magically heal. And this doctor on the way sees, a cockroach. He sees a snake here, as I say, a cockroach, or just some kind of small thing. And he's like, ooh, I'm so scared of it. And they're like, and he's like, give me a stick so I can deal with it. And they're like, you can heal people just by looking at them, but you can't take care of a tiny little lizard. What kind of power do you have? So too with Bilam, you need a sword, a giant metal sword to take care of a single donkey. But you think by opening your mouth, you're going to wipe out one of the greatest nations ever to be on the face of the earth? You're crazy. So again, this is a really interesting source, a really interesting way about why a miraculous animal here, what kind of lesson can be taught to Bilam? But again, it's not specific about the donkey. So this last source here, I was really excited when I found it. There's a series of books called Redeeming Relevance, and there's ones on Genesis and Exodus, etc. This author here, I'm not sure where he was born. I don't know if he lives in Jerusalem. I don't know if he's a native or from the States, but one of the main sources where I get a lot of these texts is a website called Sefaria, from the word for library in Hebrew, and they have so many texts, both in translation, Hebrew, etc., like that. And he's actually one of the head translators of the website. So the fact that he was quoted on the website is really cool. And he discusses here a little bit more about Bilam and his connection with the donkey. So I'll take this last source. And again, if you want to check out these books and you like this rabbi who apparently he's brilliant, he's frum, but he's also controversial, which is always the most exciting. So he says, by now it is clear that Bilam's disqualification as a true leader is primarily based on his actions. That being the case, we can understand that the Torah would want to hit hard at his behavior, even while remaining honest about his accomplishments and powers, and finding that balance between the fact that he's an incredible prophet. He can talk to God, but he's an awful person. And again, how do you balance those? How can those two things be true at once? Perhaps the strongest way in which the Torah does this is via our talking donkey. Returning one last time to this famous biblical passage, the fact that God makes a dumb animal speak is an obvious swipe at Bilam, who, as many commentators pick up, is actually being compared here to a donkey. So this is the first time we're seeing in these sources specifically, it's not just any animal, it's specifically a donkey. And again, if you lived in the times when the Torah was written and someone said, give me an example of a dumb animal, my guess is that most people would say a donkey. That was probably a symbol of a dumb animal, whereas other animals were probably symbols of strength and wisdom, etc. Dumb donkeys, which they're no dumber than any other animal, and they're quite incredible in what they can do. But donkey is a great example of a stubborn mule. And so too here is Bilam. So he continues, God opened the donkey's mouth is not fundamentally different from God placed words in Bilam's mouth. And we saw that idea in the previous source. The opening of a prophet's mouth, meaning the very act of prophecy, is as dependent on divine intervention as is the opening of a donkey's mouth. This could be said about any prophet, but it is not. And that is the vital difference, meaning that God gives the power of speech and prophecy to all of God's prophets. But specifically by comparing Bilam to the donkey, they're saying he's been blessed. Donkeys are a strong animal. That's why they're a work animal. Very, very strong, but they're not terribly bright. And again, I'm only saying it in this context. Judging the intelligence of animals makes no sense comparing it to humans. You have to think about it differently. But compared to humans, donkeys seem stubborn and dumb. And compared to other prophets, Bilam seems stubborn and dumb as well. But again, this key thing here is Bilam is seen as a great and powerful prophet. But the thing is here, and this is so key to all of us, what God is saying to him is, if you, for example, the donkey is trying to teach you a good lesson. So I am allowing him to speak. I am giving him miraculous powers because he's trying to help you. He's trying to show you literally the right path to go on. You're on a path. Go that way, not that way. So too, someone has these great prophetic gifts. When they use it for good, God will enhance it. Moshe did incredible things. But when his anger started to get the best of him, God took away ultimately prophecy and gave it over to Hoshua. So when you use your gifts for good, God will bless you. You'll be successful. But when you try and use them for bad, God will pull away his blessing. Now, obviously, the world is more complex than that because plenty of gifted people do horrible things. Jack the Ripper, one of the most famous examples, who was probably a brilliant doctor, killing many people. But again, our perspective is that when we are given, and this is the positive takeaway, when we are given gifts that we believe they are from God with gratitude, we must use them for good. Because if we use our gifts for bad, then we're basically being a bunch of stubborn, and I won't finish the word right there.